Hey, Erev Tov. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, JLIC. Great. Good to be with you. You know, Matthew, my right hand, and Marina, my left hand. Here, thank you. They get me here in one piece. Okay, so this wouldn't be a JLIC evening unless I begin with a little Dvar Torah. Can I do that? All right. You have permission? All right. So we're about to start a new book. All right. We're going to start the book of Exodus. We've just come out of the book of Genesis, and what links the two is a single word. And the single word is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is a very interesting word in Hebrew because Mitzrayim is a dual, right? It's like Sfatayim, like a naim, like Oznaim, like Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is a dual. So why is Yerushalayim a dual? Because there's two Jerusalems. There's Yerushalayim Shel Mata, Yerushalayim Shel Mala. But why is Mitzrayim a dual? Why should it be a dual? Just for those, anybody here taking Arabic? How do you say Egypt in Arabic? Masar. It's singular. It's not dual. So why would it be dual in Hebrew and singular in other Semitic languages like Arabic? Well, the geographical reason is, well, there's an upper Egypt and a lower Egypt. And the crowns that they dig up from the old pharaohs had two spitzim on them. Spitzim to symbolize that they were the pharaohs both of the upper and lower kingdoms of Egypt. But there's something else going on here in the name Mitzrayim, because the difference between Mitzrayim of Genesis and the Mitzrayim of Exodus is the Mitzrayim of Genesis is the country and the land that saves us again and again from famine. But the Mitzrayim of Exodus is the country that enslaves us. And so the message of the dual is that sometimes in life, that which saves you can also enslave you. Now that's true of substance abuse. It's true of relationships. Those of you who have been in relationships, sometimes the ones that save you can enslave you. But it's generally true in life. It's generally true in life. And it's interesting that the root word of Mitzrayim, metzar, okay, also comes from the Hebrew word for straits, metzarei teran, metzarei mandab, the straits that you have to navigate through successively so that you don't run ashore on some shoal. And I mention this Dvar Torah because it relates to where Israel is. Israel is in its history and Israel in its current domestic and foreign relations. We are between different shores, sometimes very rocky shores, sometimes shoals, if you know those. And we have to navigate very, very carefully. I mean, most ancient peoples have as their great national sagas tales of heroism and tales of success and victory. Those who've just finished the book of Genesis will tell you that it's anything about victory, okay? It's all about horrible things that Jews do to one another. And what happens in our book, we have a book that tells us how basically we screwed up, how we didn't succeed in the end, because our book ends with not one but two exiles and destruction. So it's a very different book. And every time we do make these mistakes in our history is because we didn't navigate successfully. Whether we didn't navigate successfully vis-a-vis the Babylonians or didn't navigate successfully vis-a-vis the Romans, it's true today. True today. Israel finds itself now between two shores. Two shores. There is an international shore, which in many ways is the best geostrategic situation that Israel has ever found itself in. And remember, I have an interesting memory because I have an historical memory and I have a personal memory, okay? Historical memory says that, on May 14th, 1948, this country came into being with 600 Jews, really about the size of metropolitan Boston, that had no arms, no guns, no tanks, fighting off 5 Arab armies, no natural resources, no allies in the world, okay? And somehow managed to succeed, somehow managed to survive, to create a democracy, to ingather Jews from 70 different nations to forge a nation. And that's the historical notion. But my personal thing, as I've heard before, I was in my machzor from the army was the 1970s. I came here at a time when Israel didn't have relations with India. I mean, if you wanted to go on a post-army trip to India, take on a backpack, you can go, but you weren't coming home. You weren't coming home. It happened, by the way, a lot. We had no relations with China. We had no relations with what was known as the Soviet bloc, which was Russia plus 12 other countries. We had no relations with Africa. Africa cut off, almost every country in Africa cut off relations with us after the 1974 Arab oil boycott. We had very few relations with Central and South America. We had a friendly relationship with the United States, but not a strategic alliance with the United States. We did not. No aid in that way. And we had no peace with Egypt, no peace with Jordan, certainly no peace with the 4 signatories to the Abraham Accords. I mean, if you would have told me back then that Israel would have relations with all these countries, would we have peace with Egypt? What are you, crazy? Peace with Egypt, peace with Jordan? It's unthinkable. Unthinkable. Never mind the UAE and Bahrain and maybe the possibility of Saudi Arabia. I mean, it was absolutely insane. I would have to ask you what drugs you were taking. It was absolutely beyond the ken. And today we have the situation where we have all of this. We're extremely strong, and even the countries that are criticizing us openly behind the scenes are trying to engage us, certainly on the strategic and defense level, because we have won a military victory over the last 2.5 years. And I say this as someone who taught military history at some of your least favorite universities. There has never been, I want to say in all of history, but certainly in modern history, anything that comes close to Israel's military victories over the last 2.5 years. Nothing comes close, and I mean it. I'll give you the 1-foot version of it. The closest examples you had to what Israel encountered in Gaza was the American battles in Fallujah and Mosul during the Iraq War, during the battle against ISIS. In both those cities, the United States Army, no small group, was encountering between 4,000 and 10,000 what they called rebels, insurgents, okay, 10,000, in cities that were almost completely deserted. And at the most, they had a couple of miles of tunnels. In Gaza alone, the IDF encountered between 30,000 and 40,000 terrorists who were embedded in 2.2 million people with very, very scant area to evacuate, and beneath them 500 kilometers of tunnels. Nothing like it. Nothing like in history, and the IDF prevailed, and that's just Gaza, friends. That's not Lebanon, where some of you were, where we were facing 100,000 Hezbollah guerrillas who were extremely well-trained, and upwards of 200,000 rockets and missiles, some of them very, very accurate. Hezbollah was widely regarded as the most powerful non-government military body in the world, not just in the Middle East, in the world. And then the Houthis, and then Judea and Samaria, and then Iran. And the IAF conducted hundreds of sorties that were over thousands of kilometers long and did not lose a single airplane in all that time. By the way, the United States fighting the Houthis in the Gulf lost 3 airplanes. 3 airplanes. So there's really been nothing like this. So countries want to have a relation with us because they see that we are very, very strong. And now we have recognized Somaliland, and that has thrown everybody out of whack because now Israel is a strategic player on the continent of Africa. We have regained a foothold in the entrance to the Red Sea, where the Chinese had built the largest base in Africa, in Djibouti, that was controlling the entrance to the Djibouti. Now we are there. We are there, and we are within striking range of Yemen. And it's a game changer. It's a game changer. The chances are, if the United States continues to put a credible military threat on the table, and I think that's what's the upshot of Prime Minister's last visit to Washington, his meeting with Trump. If the United States continues to put a credible military threat on the table, we could see peace between Israel and Lebanon. We could see peace between Israel and Syria, or some type of arrangement, maybe a non-belligerency arrangement. Peace, who knows, with Iran, if this regime is overthrown in the next 3 weeks, and that is a possibility. It's also a possibility they may start shooting at us, because they're not going to go quietly into that good night. But eventually, I think their days are numbered, one way or the other. And who knows? Relationship with Saudi Arabia, and a relationship with Saudi Arabia is not just a relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's a relationship with the entire Sunni world. It's Indonesia. It's Malaysia. Potentially Pakistan. The country you are going to live in, if you stay here, and you've got to stay here, will be unrecognizable, utterly, utterly unrecognizable to the country I came to 45 years ago. I want to say 50. Oh, boy. All right? Totally, totally unrecognizable. And the country I came to was, had no food, guys. Even the falafel was bad. All right? It's amazing. Unrecognizable. There was no skyline. I come in the plane, and I see that skyline of Tel Aviv, and I say, how did that get here? How did that get here? Unrecognizable. And we have not a friendly relationship with the United States. We have a strategic alliance with the United States. with all of the vicissitudes of the last few years, the disaffection of much of the Democratic Party, even branches of the Republican Party, the United States and Israel still have the deepest and most multifaceted strategic alliance, which the United States has had with any foreign power after World War II, and that includes Great Britain. That includes Great Britain. Just start with the fact that the IDF today is more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. You know that? It's crazy. More than twice. And getting larger. Their armies are getting smaller. So where does the United States have an army like this that's actually willing to fight? And during this war, upwards of 400,000 Israelis fought, either in Miluim or in the Sadir. And proportionally to the United States, that's equivalent to about 22, 23 million Americans, which is roughly 8 million more Americans than fought in all of World War II. So anybody who's making policy in the Pentagon looks at that and says, really, you got to be kidding. There's absolutely no asset, strategically, defensively speaking, to the state of Israel. That's just the beginning of it. It's the weapons development, the fact that we cooperate in the financing and deployment of Iron Dome, the development and financing of David Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, other systems. Every American naval destroyer carries an Israeli gun. Every American fighter pilot, whether a fixed wing or a helicopter pilot, wears an Israeli-made helmet. Okay? Every Israeli infantry person carries an Israeli-made personal bandage. Every one of them. Anybody watch The Pit? The series, The Pit on TV? They keep on saying, bring us the Israeli bandages, bring us the Israeli bandages. I love that. That's the same bandage that the U.S. military uses. It's developed in Jerusalem, a little startup. But it stops bleeding very, very effectively. All of this, and then, training, it's maneuvers, but mostly it's cooperation on intelligence. There's no closer intelligence relationship in the world than the United States and Israel. And it's cyber, and now it's going to be laser. And all of that is truly extraordinary. In the United States, I don't care who's in the White House. They don't throw that out so quickly. They really don't. Not just that, our flying the F-35 jet, the way we fly the F-35 jet, is the best advertisement for that jet in the world. And they make billions in Fort Worth, Texas, is where that jet is made, of the fact that we fly them as successfully as we do. Everyone wants an F-35 now. If you notice that, everybody wants an F-35 because we phone them. The Saudis want them, the Turks want it. Not to say good news, but everyone wants it because we fly them that way. And they show them what they can do. So all of this is extraordinary right now. Is truly extraordinary right now. But we have to navigate. We have to navigate very, very carefully. We have to navigate with a Western Europe, large segments of which no longer view us as an ally, no longer view us as a common liberal democracy. And this is a Europe which I have grave doubts of whether it's willing to defend itself, much less defend us. And to find common ground to navigate in a world like that, where you have countries like Spain, Ireland, the Netherlands. Netherlands used to be one of our best friends. And sometimes even Italy, joining with calls for accusing us of genocide, calling for the criminalization of Israeli leaders, the arrest of Israeli leaders. The prime minister now flies to the United States, but he can't fly over European countries because he's got health issues, and if he has to land in Europe, they're going to arrest him. I like that one, Great Britain. So that's not an easy situation to navigate at all. And then we come to the domestic situation, which is going to be the great challenge facing you. If I grew up and I came to this country and came of age at a time when our greatest challenges were foreign, when the notion that in 1991 during the first Gulf War that the Iraqi army could find its way into Tel Aviv, and it was a real threat, okay? Or the Syrians would attack any minute, or the Egyptians would come running across the Suez Canal again. All this was very real for us, very real for us. Today, Israel faces no conventional military threat, zero. All these armies are gone. But your greatest challenge are the challenges that I did not face. We had a very united country. We had a country that didn't face issues like Haredi service in the military. We had a country that didn't face questions of the total breakdown of Israeli governance in the 62% of the country which is south of Beersheba, which is the Negev. In the Negev, there's no effective Israeli rule. There's no control over gun smuggling, drug smuggling, even human smuggling. And we've seen it played out in the recent weeks in the confrontation between the police and the town of Tarabin. That's just the beginning of what's going to happen there. We face questions of governance and sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, in the small segment of the Jewish population there that is engaging in criminal activities and attacking Palestinians, something called settler violence. But settler violence is about 70 people out of 400,000. Let's put it in proportion, but it's there. And I see so many of these questions as stemming from the same problem. So you have this book up here. It's one of my books that are available at famously reduced prices now. And this is 2048. And this is it's not really a book. It's an essay. And because it's in Hebrew. See, it's in Hebrew. It's in Arabic. And it's in English. The English is all of 80 pages. And it grew out of a conversation between myself and the Prime Minister around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the Kenesset. Because we had these things that called filibusters. It's one of these institutions we managed to take from the United States, thank you. You know how to say filibuster in Hebrew? If you want to impress your friends, okay, how you say filibuster? Anybody know how to say filibuster? Filibuster. So we had filibusterim, and they'd vote like 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, Bibi likes to schmooze about books. So we came down and we just schmoozed about books, and we got to talking about what Israel should look like on its 100th birthday, 2048. And sort of riffing about it, right? And riffing about this and thinking out of the box. And I think, we're so bogged down on our day-to-day crises. Little did we know what a day-to-day crisis was, right? This is well before October 7th, 2023. And then, the government fell and Corona came and I locked myself in a room and I decided to write my ideas down. So it's 80 pages in English. It's 22 chapters that cover just about every aspect of Israeli society. It includes the longest chapters about the peace process, but it's Israel diaspora, Israel Arabs. It's the need for judicial reform, which I wrote about 2 years before the whole explosion over judicial reform. We need judicial reform, not necessarily just reform of the government, but we do need judicial reform, certainly. And many, many aspects. But if you look at the book, you'll see that the theme that runs through it is this. For 2,000 years, we did not know what sovereignty was, okay? We didn't know what sovereignty was. And then one bright day in May 1948, we woke up and found ourselves the proud owner of a sovereign country. And we didn't know what to do with it. We do not understand sovereignty, okay? We're like one long Dol Sinai, all right? Those people had to die out before they went into the land because they'd only known slavery. Well, we had only known diaspora. We'd known diaspora for 2,000 years, and we didn't understand what sovereignty was. And you can look at the issues facing Israel today, and the major issues are Haredi service, and not just Haredi service, it's Haredi involvement in the economy of the state of Israel. Because if the status quo continues, the state's simply going to die. This is not a political statement. It's a statement of reality. It's ineluctable. It's unassailable. Because of the demographics, this population is doubling every 25 years. So in 25 years from now, about 40% of the elementary school students in this country will be Haredi, and they will not be getting anything more than a second grade education in math and in English, and they will not be able to integrate into the economy. So it's not just about service in the military. It's about, the country will simply not be able to afford them. The whole place will collapse, and anybody will leave. So it's really, truly an existential issue, the Haredi issue. And I say this out of a great respect for the Haredim. They're extraordinary in so many ways. They're one of the few populations in the world that's actually willing to be impoverished for what they believe. And they have communities that are impoverished, but they have no crime, which is also unthinkable. But that situation has to change. But the Haredi issue, the Bedouin issue in the South, and I lived in the South for years, and I watched it disappear under illegal building, which is rampant. You build a little addition to my house in Jaffa, like about 1 millimeter, and you get the cops there within an hour. You can build a city in the Negev. No one does anything, all right? They just went into Tarabin. It turns out in Tarabin, not a single person plays Arnona in the entire town, okay? They don't pay any electricity, they don't pay Arnona, they don't pay anything. It's amazing. And, the question of, say, settler violence, they're all the same problem. They're all segments of the population that are not under Israeli sovereignty. And that is your great challenge. That is the navigation you're going to have to make between, on one hand, taking advantage of the immense strategic advantages that we have gained through our force of arms, through our resilience, through effective international leadership, and what's going on domestically, which in many ways is as dangerous, is as hazardous as almost anything we faced on the battlefield, because it comes from inside. It comes from beside. And we're going to read, again, we're going to read about stories of what happens to the Jewish people when they're not together and we do crazy things with golden calves, etc. All right? And this is going to be your huge challenge. You have one of the great opportunities in Jewish history, right where you are at your age. And that opportunity is to actually step forward and make a difference. Make a difference right now. To be involved socially, politically. Israel has the most deep-seated and multifaceted civil society of any country on earth. You only have to be in Kenesset and be in some discussion in one of the committees and see all the different NGOs who come in to scream at you, and they say you're doing it all wrong. But it's amazing. And if you care about anything in this country, there's going to be 10 different organizations you can enjoy. You can join and make your voices heard. And you can make a difference. I can point many times in Israel's history where these NGOs have actually made a very important difference. And this is your opportunity. It's a great zchut right now to be in your place, to navigate. I'm very optimistic about Israel's future, I got to tell you. It helps to have the historical perspective to know where we were in 1948. It helps to have my personal perspective to know where we were in the 1970s and how far we've come. But the generation that's coming out of Gaza, that's coming out of Lebanon now, is going to be our greatest generation. You know, my father landed on Normandy Beach in World War II. He was the greatest generation in the United States, but your generation is the greatest generation here. And it's very different than the generation that came out of the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War in 1973 was a generation of division. Part of it went to Peace Now, and part of it went to Gush Emunim, in different direction. But this is not. These are people who have spent hundreds of days in Miluim or in Sadir and have fought alongside people from the right, the left, religious, secular, from Ashkenazim and Sephardim, right? And it's going to be very different. So I'm very optimistic about our future. I'm looking at the Middle East now, and I see that everything can change in the next year and a half. But the crucible of it all, where it all hangs, is how we navigate our internal dissensions, our internal issues. How we reestablish our sovereignty where we need to establish our sovereignty. How we learn to talk to one another in civil ways where we're not at each other's throats. All of that. And that's your, going to be the professor here. That's your assignment for the next 20, 30 years, okay? I'll be back when I'm about 110 to see that you have done this, okay? That's your assignment. Adkan, questions, anybody? Sir.
First of all, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure.
I guess, so you spoke about just now how Israeli sovereignty, we have to extend it, and that's really a core issue.
Yeah.
And also a key to solving these problems. Let's start with the Haredim, for example. How would you see that playing out? How do you enforce or spread Israeli sovereignty in a society that's not interested?
It is in many ways the hardest. The Bedouin issue is simply a police and army issue. Just is. I have great doubts whether the police are capable of actually doing it. They just simply don't have enough people. They don't have enough people. And I don't know the answer there. Maybe a civil guard or something, but law has to be established in the Negev. The Haredim is a completely different issue in the sense that, yes, it stems from the breakdown of our sovereignty, but the solution lies something else. It's not a police issue. And I don't think at the end of the day you can arrest tens of thousands of Haredim and put them in mass, incarceration areas, and if they don't serve in the army. You can pressure them. You can pressure them by cutting out various incentives and subsidies. You can do that, and there should be penalties for that. At the end of the day, I'm optimistic about this too, but for a very different reason. It's not just a matter of policy. It's the entire edifice of the Haredi community in this country is not sustainable. And somewhere along the line, I think their Admorim understand this. It's not sustainable because you're going to have more and more and more people. And the Haredi women who are working and taking care of 10 kids and cooking are not going to be able to sustainable. And I think there's also going to be market forces at work where you're going to have maybe one Haredi family gets a new washing machine and the next Haredi family says, well, I want one of those. And I spend a lot of time talking to reformist elements in the Haredi community. And there's no community, there are communities, there are many different communities. I was actually, as ambassador I was the first ambassador to conduct a series of secret meetings with the Haredi leadership in the United States. That was very interesting, because you realize there's not one community, there's many communities have different ideas. But I've been told recently that, for example, the degree of penetration of internet into the community is much higher than anybody knows. You know, the kosher phones aren't so kosher anymore. And what percentage of that community may change. I've recently had a conversation with one of the great experts on Haredi in this country, and he says 5-10 years, it's all going to change. So, okay, you can prod, you can cut out subsidies. I don't think arrests are going to help very much. But I think eventually that the bulk of the Haredi community in this country will be part of the country. We don't ask them to stop being Haredi. It's the last thing. We just want them to be Israelis. We want them to be Israelis. I don't even care if they salute the flag and sing Hatikva, because they won't. They won't. What I want them to do is to teach their kids math and English. I want them to serve in the military. And you cannot tell me that you cannot be shomer mitzvot and serve in the military, right? Can't. And so it's interesting. A last point about the Haredim, okay, which is, to me, as someone who studies Israeli politics, is also fascinating. This election, and we're going to be coming into election year now, has several issues which we've almost never encountered before. These issues that cut across right and left. So one of the issues is going to be whether we have a state inquiry into the events of October 7th or a government inquiry. Because you'd think that's just right and left, but it's not. There are many people on the right who lost loved ones on October 7th and the aftermath of October 7th, and they want a state inquiry. Okay, they don't care necessarily what Netanyahu and his government want. But the bigger issue is the Haredi issue. The Haredi draft issue on October 6th, 2023 was a left-wing issue, totally left-wing. And what the war did was to make it a national issue. And the people who are leading the issue today are Dafka on the religious right, because they have paid disproportionately for this war in terms of wounded and dead, disproportionately. And they say, hey, listen, we read the Torah and it tells us to fight. How is it you read the same Torah and it tells you not to fight? What's that about? So that's so interesting, by the way, for the future of the coalition making. I'm be fascinated to see how this plays out. Where we actually have national issues that we really haven't had for a very long time. Everything's been very polarized between right and left, working class, elitists, Ashkenazim, Mizrachim, religious, unreligious, whatever. Okay, more questions, please. Oh, wow, go.
Yeah. My question is similar to Aviatar, but
yeah.
I'm curious how you want to extend sovereignty over the Arab population, that has different challenges in the Haredim. You're not able to offer them, Zionism or.
Well, the book has an interesting chapter. It's called, you like it if you're American, it's called The New Deal. It doesn't really quite work in Hebrew, okay? But the New Deal says that in facing Israeli Arabs, I'm not talking about the Bedouin, I'm talking about Israeli Arabs. Bedouins is a different problem in many ways. You say, we want a deal. Okay, we are going to make this country truly a country of equality. And it's equality, in the Churchillian sense. It's got to be equality in the courtroom, in the classroom, in the workplace, truly equality. And have equal opportunities. But the quid pro quo is loyalty. Loyalty. Now, there are 194 countries in the world. The vast majority of them are nation states. Okay? Not like the United States. The United States is a multinational country. But the vast majority of countries are like Bulgaria, Germany, Ireland. They're nation states. And in those nation states, there are large non-national minorities. And they are loyal. The best example I can give you is the Jews of England. Who is British here? Anybody? Yeah, good. Okay, good. All right. Your family, when they see the Union Jack, all right, do they salute that flag? Have they ever been willing to serve in the army and fight for that flag? No, nobody. Oh, okay. But most British Jews, most Anglo Jews, they will sing "God Save the Queen" or the King to a king who is also the head of the Church of England, and they will salute and fight for a flag that has not one cross on it but 3 crosses on it. Okay, and there's no reason why an Israeli Arab can't salute our flag and sing our national anthem. Same reason. Okay, to be loyal, to be a loyal minority in this country. And if you look at the polls, every year there's more and more Arabs who actually think that. They've now passed the 50% line. But, okay, we've got a long way to go. So that's the New Deal. The Bedouin is a whole different other issue. That has to do with enforcing our laws. Okay, there are laws. For example, over 30% of Bedouin males have 3 wives. I'm writing a book about the war. There's 700 books about October 7th. There's no book about the war yet, believe it or not. So I'm writing this book. It's 2 400-page volumes. This is what I'm doing in my spare time. Okay? And I just wrote about the first person to be killed on Summit Mephalstim on 7 o'clock at 7:01 in the morning of October 7th. Believe it or not, the first person killed was an Israeli Bedouin. And the people killed with him were 5 Palestinian workers he was bringing to work from Gaza. Believe it? The first 6 people killed on the morning of October 7th along the highway were Arabs. And I'm doing a little research on the driver, and it turns out he's the father of 30. Father of 30, and he has 3 wives. Polygamy, friends, is illegal in the state of Israel. Illegal. And these wives, it's not like Bedouin guy falls in love with 3rd wife. These are all business deals. And these wives are brought in from all over the place. And we don't enforce that law. And so the negative disappears. And by the way, I was doing research. He lives in an illegal settlement. He lives in an illegal settlement. No one comes to him and say, pay Arnona. No one comes to pay electricity. This is a meltdown of our sovereignty. And what you've seen is, I can go into deeper, I do it in the book, I go into greater detail, is that the Bedouin population in the Negev has undergone twin processes. They've become Palestinians. They were never Palestinians before. Now they're Palestinian nationalists. And they've undergone Islamization, that the southern wing of the Islamic movement, which is Hamas. If you go down there, it's all green moss. And we were responsible. We turned our back on the Bedouin. We didn't educate them. We never brought them into our society. Believe me, we're responsible. This is the reality now. And so now you have a population which we don't even know how big it is. It's hundreds of thousands of people, which may or may not be so loyal to this country. And we'll find out. Okay? But certainly is not in a very bad. I don't want to, to vilify an entire population. But when an entire town of Tarabin doesn't pay a cent, a shekel, an agora in Arnona, then they're culpable. Okay, maybe not everyone's trading in guns and not everyone's trading in drugs, but they're all violators of law, which we are not enforcing. Okay, so you almost can't blame them if we're not enforcing it. So there we have it. So it's a different solution for the Bedouin. Okay, everybody. Yeah.
So you mentioned the State Commission of Inquiry.
Yeah.
And the word that came out from the previous one, from October 1973, was the word concepcia, an intelligence failure.
Yep.
I was wondering, as a military historian, what Israel could have learned from the Six-Day War and actually how it fought, that it could have applied.
73 war, yeah.
And how it could have applied that also. Maybe
oh God, you got 3 hours. First of all, cards on the table. I was in the government during this period, and I had a lot to do with Gaza. So I had a front row seat at the concepcia. And the concepcia, if you don't know it, was that Hamas was not interested in war. Hamas was interested in developing the Gaza Strip, unlike Hezbollah, okay? And that if you paid them off with Qatari money, they would take that money and they would use it for development of the Gaza Strip. That was the concepcia, right? It was wishful thinking. It was a little bit of racism because we didn't think the Palestinians were capable of doing such anything. We had great regard for Hezbollah, but not for Hamas. And everybody bought into it. There was nobody who stood up and said, maybe this is a bad idea. Yvette Lieberman at one point says a bad idea, but the Americans bought into it, by the way. The Europeans bought into it. Everybody bought into it. Everybody thinks it's just Bibi, they're mistaken. It was Obama, it was Biden, it was Trump. They all bought into the Qatari money thing. Because no one wanted to deal with Gaza. It was just a mess. Pay them off, shake it down. It's a mafia thing. And what we should have learned was to create what the Americans call a red team, or what we call in the Talmud, Ifcha Mistamba. Someone who comes along and says, hey, everyone thinks this, but maybe this is the answer. That's Ifcha Mistamba. And no one did that. No one seriously did that. There were people in the army who tried to do it, but they didn't get very far. The people came up with a report called Jericho Wall, which described October 7th almost to a T a year before it happened. And no one wanted to talk about it. No one to talk about it. They said, it's aspirational. They're not serious, these guys. Not serious. So that's what we have to learn. We thought we should have learned from 1973 that when you have a concepcia, the first sign that you have a concepcia is where everyone agrees on something. Because that's not natural. That's not natural. and we have to take a different side. I personally, I mean, when I was ambassador, I took my role as Ifcham Istanbul very, very seriously. Because you'd go back to Jerusalem from Washington, and everybody thought the same thing. And I have to say, okay, I know you guys all think this, but here is another view of this. And you've got to be prepared to get the living stuffing beaten out of you by everybody. They'll all jump on you. But that was my job. I just, it wasn't me. I didn't take it personally. The Prime Minister would have some choice words for me all the time when I told him things. He didn't always like what I had to say. And maybe I wasn't always right. But that was the job. We need more people like that to stand up. And one over here, sir. Yeah.
I'm very curious what you think as to how, if we look 50 years into the future, how this exact same situation will happen again. Because 2 weeks before the start of 7th of October, we had a whole a Kenesset for all the Modi'in people in the country down in Beersheba, where we spoke about how Yom Kippur was a big Modi'in failure, and the Ramatkal was there, and the Faked Modi'in was there 2 weeks before the 7th of October, and then we have this massive Modi'in failure once again. And now, of course,
Is there any record of that, Kedis?
Yeah.
I like to use that in my book. All right. Matthew, can we follow up with this gentleman? What's your name?
I'm just kidding.
I like it. I'm interested. Yeah.
So how, and of course now we're looking at all these internal things and we're saying how everything happened and of course it's quick and he came out before and said, but how are we actually going to practically see this in the future and say oh, this is going to be different?
Well, hopefully we learn. Okay, we learned from that mistake. We did not learn from October 1973. We did not. We just didn't. We told ourselves that we did. But we didn't. And also because, again, October 1973, believe it or not, was one of the great military victories of modern history. Israelis are strange. Most countries, like the United States, for example, don't judge a war by the way it starts. They judge a war by the way it ends. So World War II began with Pearl Harbor. It was there October 6th. There October 7th was Pearl Harbor. Terrible surprise attack. My father fought in the Battle of the Bulge, which was one of the worst intelligence failures in American military history. But they won the war. Okay. In Israel, we lose the first battle, and we tear our hearts out of it for over the course of decades. And we don't look at the fact that the Yom Kippur War ended with Israeli artillery within range of Cairo and Damascus. Entire Arab armies defeated, and we have never faced a serious conventional threat since then. It was one of the great... At West Point, they don't study the Six-Day War. They study the 1973 war. They think it was a great military victory. We don't think it's a great military victory, but they do. It's so strange. And the same thing's true about this war, too. I mean, we'll beat ourselves up, okay, justifiably over October 7th, but we won't look at what I just told you before, that this is one of the great military victories in modern history. Now, we have to draw lessons from that. Oh my God! There's the conceptual lesson is only one of the lessons we learned. We learned never again to let large, unconventional forces build up on our borders. We learned never again to neglect our reserve corps. Okay? We learned never to be short of equipment again. We learned so many different things. By the way, we also learned not to be afraid of Iran, because we were always afraid of Iran. Finally got over that. We learned. Even the tactical lessons we've learned, fighting in Gaza, what the fighting in Gaza was like in the first 3 weeks as opposed to a year and a half later, was very, very different. Very different. The lessons we learned in Gaza that we then applied to Lebanon, because the army that went into Lebanon was a very different army than the one that went into Gaza on October 27th in Land Group. Very different. So there are many lessons from every war. Tzahal is kind of good at this. Tzahal is a military historical wing. Every conversation going on, even at the battalion level, is recorded for history and then analyzed. So one hopes that after this war, in the 40 volumes of these histories, we'll be able to reach, I think, a better understanding of what went right and what went wrong. Because so many things went right and went wrong. Anybody in the back? Women? Anybody? Come on, you guys are all quiet. Why? Okay, no women. Go ahead, I'll get everybody. Yeah.
Are you more optimistic or nervous about the post-Trump administration?
Just had this conversation in the cab coming over here. Listen, we don't know who's going to be the next president. We don't know if it's going to be J.D. Vance. We don't know if it's going to be, Marco Rubio or, AOC or Mamdani. Okay, we don't know. What we have to do to be responsible is to assume that the relationship we've had with the United States over the past, 4 or 5 decades is going to change. It's going to change because of processes occurring within the United States. And these are trends and processes over which we have almost no say. We didn't invent wokeism. We didn't invent MAGA. We didn't invent intersectionality. We didn't invent any of these things. But we're on the receiving end of a lot of them. And what we have to do to be responsible, on one hand, to try to restore to the degree that we can, and I'm not saying it's going to be easy, bipartisan support, not going to be easy. And at the same time, we have to diversify our foreign policy portfolio. We cannot be entirely dependent on the United States the way we were. 99% of our armaments came from the United States. 99%. Get that? Now, cards on the table. In 2021, I wrote an article for Tablet magazine calling for the end of U.S. aid to Israel. Me, Mr. America here.
What was the alternative?
It's a long argument. I'll try to give you the one-foot version, which is this. One, keep in mind, American support for Israel is a subsidy for the American arms industry. Okay? Everything we buy, we are given permission to buy, and that subsidy is paid to those arms, people who make those arms, whether in Fort Worth, Texas, or Alabama, different places. We cannot make what we want to make. We cannot sell what we want to sell. There's a great opportunity cost there. We can't sell. We can't necessarily use what we want to use. During this last war, the State Department had an entire wing that was dedicated to monitoring the use of American arms by the Israeli army. And eventually they put a hold on some of these arms, as you know. We can't be in a position like that. Cannot. Now, no country is, totally arms independent, but we have to make our own tank shells. We have to make our own artillery shells. We have to make different types of armaments. We can't. And I think, I got a lot of flack when I first wrote this in 2021. Today, everyone agrees that we should be in a partnership with the United States. We shouldn't be on the recipient end. And that's crucial because taking that aid exposes us to blackmail all the time. We pay you from our tax dollars, and therefore we can tell you what to do. We can't be in a position like that. It's not lo mechubad for an independent, sovereign Jewish state that's strong. It sends the wrong message. It sends a message of dependency. It sends a message of weakness. So that's, I feel, we have to get independent. So that's what I feel. We have to diversify our portfolio. There's not going to be a substitute for America as our ultimate ally. We're not going to have an alliance like that with Russia or with China. But the relationship will change. And it's okay. We can deal with it. We fought the 6-Day War without a single American bullet. You know this? We fought the 6-Day War with French bullets. Then the French switched sides. Okay? So, okay, we can do it. We can. And I'm optimistic about it. Anybody? Keep on looking over here. Yes, sir.
We spoke earlier about the polarization of the government and the state of Israel. Obviously, polarization is very clearly seen throughout American politics. What is the way that we can look forward to, as you say, we are the builders of the Jewish future? What's the way that we can look forward to trying to unite more people instead of keeping a divisive nation, and also looking and seeing that our government leaders are oftentimes some of the leaders of this divisiveness?
Good. So you're talking about internally, not externally. Externally, yeah. That we have to wean ourselves of the politics of division. A lot of politicians, get up there and they win elections, or they think, by sowing divisions among the Jewish people. And I think you make your voices heard in the election that's coming up, or elections are coming up, that says we want to have politicians who are not divisive. They're entitled to their views. They have to have their views, and those views cannot be consonant with everyone's views. We're going to disagree. But we have to do it in a civil way, and we have to understand all the time. At the end of the day, we are all part of the same people, and we share the same destiny. We may have different ideas about how to get there. We share the same destiny, and it's into your hands. You have to make that clear to your political leaders or your prospective political peers that that's what you expect. And that's the way to win, not by castigating or demonizing or alienating another camp. Not easy. Some of these people I really disagree with. one of the aspects of Kenesset that I really loved, you know, you go to Kenesset is a little bit of a farce. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but once the TV cameras go on, which is a thing, they put these TV cameras in the Knesset to make it more democratic, but they actually made it less democratic. I don't know how many people watch Knesset TV, but the minute the red light goes on, everyone starts screaming at one another. Okay, because before that we're all like talking very constructively, and you scream horrible. If the seats weren't screwed down, we would throw these seats at one another. Things that I was called in Knesset, I was called a fascist, and I was called this and a racist and whatever. And then you go to the coffee shop behind the plenary. And then you sit down and talk to these same guys and hug them and ask them how your kids are. And you know, there are very few like seriously, you know, acrimonious relationships in the Knesset. I had a few with some of the Arabs, but that's about it. But my best relationship in the Knesset were people from across the aisle, were people from the Labor Party, who I disagreed with, but we were all there to serve. I had the same type of relationship, strangely enough, with the people in the Obama administration, where we would scream at each other for hours. But at the end of the day, you know, we're in the White House at 3 o'clock in the morning and everyone else is sleeping. So we're there because we both want to serve our countries. We actually had that in common. So the same thing's true in the Kenesset. So understand that if someone comes out of Gaza after 200, 300 days of Elohim and disagrees with you, you have that in common. You were both out there to fight. And I think that this war is a tremendous opportunity for us to move to that stage. I really do. Someone, a centrist, go ahead.
Over the next week period, in your opinion,
Yes.
what do you think Israelis should expect to see from Iran?
So it's always a toss-up. You know, if we come out too strongly in favor of the protesters, that gives the government an opportunity to say, well, Israel's behind this. I think we should, you know, open our arms and say, you know, this is, I think Bibi was right. He says, you know, this is your opportunity, the people. If we can help them in clandestine ways, it would be good. And I think we can. I think the United States can do it too. And hope. Listen, they are not going to go quietly into that dark night, the Ayatollahs. And their MO over the course of the last 20 years is to let these protests come out and blow off steam. And let them run around for a couple of weeks. And then at the end of a couple of weeks, pow, let them have it. And they have tremendous amount of force at their disposal. We're talking about the RGC, we're talking about the army, we're talking about the besiege, which are these thugs they have. And once they take off those gloves, you know, you can see thousands of people killed. End of the day, I think their time is limited. That what we did to them last summer, what the United States did to them this summer, so humiliated, so delegitimized them. The loss of Hezbollah, the loss of Syria, now the loss of Venezuela, huge ally of Iran. Huge ally. Hezbollah operated out of Venezuela. It's people understand. They see blood. They're not respecting the women are not wearing the hijab so quickly, right? And so I don't know. It's the end of the beginning of the end. But I think that the regime's longevity is limited. I really do. And if that happens, you know, one would hope that we go back to where we were, you know, pre-1979, where the Iranians were our good friends. The Iranians were our good friends. Hard to imagine, no? I had friends who got out of the army and went on a tiyul to Iran with a backpack. They didn't go to India, all right? In India, you get arrested, but Iran was great. Think about this. Crazy, huh? How many we have to stop? Any more questions? All right, how many got? 1, 2, 3. We'll get 1, 2, 3. Go, I'll ask them all. Go, Bo. Kadima.
You obviously served during the Obama administration. What was the biggest challenge in terms of that, you know, that kind of relationship?
Sleep. All right, I'll tell you that. Go ahead. Yes. Next.
What type of judicial reform do you see?
Could work? Yeah. Okay. And anybody over here? Yes, sir. Ma'am.
What do you think about the growing number of like anti-Israel Jews, especially like among the younger generation?
In the United States, in the West.
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 different things. The hardest thing with the Obama administration was trying to maintain bipartisan support, and to try to maintain the facade of bipartisan support when it was breaking down. And if you read a book of mine that's available at famous reduced prices, is Ally. It's my memoir of my time in Washington, and I talk about what it did to me emotionally to go out there and sort of put on a face that everything's okay when behind the scenes things were not okay. It wasn't one crisis; it was revolving crisis. Every day there were several crises. It was kept on coming at us. It wasn't easy, and that, you know, it was a good preparation for what we went through in the last 2 years. What can I say? It was good, you know. Kashebi Mun Kalbakav. What do I think we should do about the judicial sphere? So in this, I started working in the Kenesset with JLIC on judicial reform. And it was clear to me that the situation was not sustainable. That in previous decades, the Supreme Court would overturn a ruling of a law of the Kenesset once every year or two. But in the last couple of years when I was in Kenesset, it was several times a year and was multiplying. And the reasons were this. One was that the Israeli Supreme Court arrogates to itself the largest peer review of any Supreme Court in the world. Everything is adjudicable. They can tell you where this camera should go, okay, which is kind of crazy. And then the second reason was the way Supreme Court judges are chosen. So those of you who are from the United States know, or maybe you should know, that you have not one but two opportunities to influence the composition of your free Supreme Court. You vote for the president, who nominates, and you vote for the Senate, which confirms. In Israel, you have no say. That Supreme Court judges are chosen by a committee of about 11, but the majority of people on that committee are jurists, including sitting Supreme Court judges. Okay, so you can think, if you're a Supreme Court judge, you have to choose a successor. The person you're going to choose thinks exactly like you do. Exactly like you do. Which means that the Supreme Court, in terms of its worldview, its outlook, was marching in place circa 1992. But the Knesset had moved on. The Knesset had moved right wing, so the distance between the two was growing wider and wider. And eventually it was going to snap. Eventually people in the Knesset were going to say, who elected you? Misamcha. We're elected. We're the sovereign here. And we're going to pass a law that says 61 members of Knesset are going to overturn any ruling by the Supreme Court, which means the end of judicial review, which is one of the pillars of democracy. So what we're trying to do is find ways that we could reform the way judges are chosen and reform the purview, the scope of the Supreme Court. Along comes the government in January of 23 and says, well, we're basically going to erase anything. We're going to not just change the way Supreme Court judges are chosen, we're going to take away all of the authority of the Supreme Court, almost all of it, in a way that rendered the Supreme Court pretty much just a rubber stamp. And that was too far. And that's what created so much of the controversy here. But I could go on and on and on, but let me just say this. My mother was a family therapist, and her favorite line was, the presenting problem is not the problem. The presenting problem in the judicial reform controversy was not the judicial reform. The people who were protesting out in the street, most of them from pretty affluent areas, these protests weren't taking place in Kiryat Shimon or Kiryat Atar or these places, Kiryat Malachi. They're taking place in northern Tel Aviv and Kaplan. Were, for the most part, affluent, for the most part, secular, for the most part, Ashkenazi. And if you live in my neighborhood in Jaffa, they said, this is not about democracy. We're actually democracy. We're the people who vote, and the people who are protesting against the judicial reform are basically people who are embittered that they lost at the polls, and they're trying to regain through protests what they could not gain in the polls. And so beneath the judicial review were all of these fundamental faults in Israeli society: religious versus secular, Ashkenazi versus Mizrachi, periphery versus center, left versus right, certainly, okay? Very socioeconomic, working class, not working class. And these faults continue. And I see it played out all the time. If I had 10 more minutes, I'd tell you all the different ways it's playing out even as we're sitting here, right, tonight. And somewhere along, we're going to have to address those issues as well. They're very fundamental. And what do we do about the youth in the world who hate us? First, we have to define what we mean by the world, okay? When we talk about the world, we're talking about Western Europe and sort of liberal United States. So that's not the world. Let's not, diss 1.4 billion Indians, because, they're also part of the world. Or the Chinese who do, I think they kind of like us. We have tough relations with them, but the people like us. And a big chunk of America, and even parts of Europe like us. Okay, we have these problems. And I don't know if they're going to change, because in those populations, I don't know if they're willing to defend themselves. They're getting more liberal every year. They're getting less religious every year. And we're getting more conservative every year and more observant every year. A quote-unquote normal society in the West is triangular, whereas on the top you have the industrial and military elite, and they tend to be right wing. And then you have the youth on the bottom, which tend to be left wing. Okay, that's America. We're just the opposite. Our industrial and military elite are left wing. You can't make this up, right? And our youth is right wing. And we have the biggest youth of any industrialized country because we have the largest per capita population under 30, because we actually have kids, which they don't have in the West anymore. That is right wing, which is why there's no real left in this country left. And the big fight is going to be over the right wing parties in Kenesset, or center right. What can we do? We cannot do much. Now, this is a hard thing. And I say this even to American University. We are not going to, for example, create a Palestinian state that's going to threaten our national existence tomorrow to make people at Columbia University feel good. We're not going to do that. We're not going to not defend ourselves against Hamas and Hezbollah to make students, I don't know, Cornell or Harvard feel good about themselves. We're just not. And so there's a limit to how much we can actually impact them, and I think we should be humble. We should be humble that, again, there are all these processes going on in the world which we have no control over, that we may be on the receiving end of them, like wokeism, for example, what's going on in the MAGA parties now with, Tucker Carlson, all these things. We have no control over this. These are people who are not, at this stage, they are not opposed to what we do. They're opposed to who we are. And we're not about to change who we are. For the Jewish Democratic State of Israel, we're not going to change it. Tough. Tough. We'll go through it because they may change too. They may change in ways like this. We also have to remember one thing, and I'm going to leave you with this because it's a hard thing. Keep it in mind, because I participate in a lot of government discussions about our public diplomacy and how we have to invest more in campuses and invest more in social media. And of course we do. But people tend to forget who we are in this country, and what we are is the Jewish state. And I always tell you, there's someone who has conducted, I don't know how many interviews since October 7th, thousands, right? That behind 90% of the questions I get is classic anti-Semitic tropes. That is the belief that Jews wake up in the morning and we think nothing else but go out and kill innocent people, especially children or journalists. We're basically evil people. That's the assumption. Almost all the questioning I get. And, no one actually starts with the assumption that we are actually human beings who want to live and want to defend our families and believe in something. So it's a huge challenge. Let's not forget who we are. We are the Jewish state. And as the Jewish state, you, have to navigate very carefully between the straits of that's what saves us and that which enslaves us. We still have the same task that Moshe Rabbeinu had at that time, was to lead us through some very difficult times to a promised land, which is the future of this country. The future of this country. It's in your hands. Yalla, tasu את זה. תתחילו לעבוד. יאללה, קדימה. יאללה.